that there is no one right answer in finance. I think we tend to think of finance, and finance is taught like it's math. And in math, there's one right answer for everybody. No matter who you are or where you're from or how old you are, it's just like 2 + 2 = 4 for everybody. That's how math works. And finance is, in my view, it's not like that at all. That people who are equally smart, equally educated, equally informed can come to totally different conclusions about how to manage their money. And I think once you embrace that, it does two things. One, it makes you less cynical about other people and less judgmental about how other people are spending their money. And two, it gives you permission to just be like, what works for you? You don't have to worry about whether you're doing it quote unquote right or wrong. If it's working for you and it's making you happy, then maybe it's the right thing to do. And there are things that I do with my own money, my wife and I do with our own money, that are probably the quote unquote wrong thing to do. That if you looked at it on a spreadsheet, you would say, oh, you should be doing this differently, but it works for us and it makes us happy and it helps us sleep well at night. So therefore it's the right thing for us to do. And I think once you have that little nugget of like, nobody's crazy. People do crazy things, but everything that people do with their money makes sense to them. It works for them. And yes, there's always room for improvement and people can be misinformed and do things that they're going to regret. And we should try to help them understand what their options are. But people do so many different things with their money. Can I give you one quick story that's in the book that I really liked? The majority of lottery tickets in the United States are purchased by the poorest Americans. The lowest decile of income earners buy the majority of lottery tickets. Now, someone like me or you might look at that and say, that's crazy. These people who can barely feed themselves are buying scratcher tickets. That makes no sense. It's not rational. I have a friend who's a financial advisor. He's successful now, but he grew up in abject poverty. He was homeless most of his childhood. And he told me a story one time that he remembers when he was a child and his refrigerator was empty and his mom had $3 to her name. And he said, look, $3 is not going to fill the refrigerator. It's not going to make a dent. But $3 will buy you 3 lottery tickets that will give you the potential to fill the refrigerator. And he said, until you can understand that mindset, you don't understand why these poor people are buying so many lottery tickets. When it's your only chance of hope of literally feeding your kids in this situation, it doesn't make sense. And so that's an extreme example, but it just shows like there's so much going on inside of people's heads and there's no one right answer of what's the right thing to do. Then I think all of us just need to find out what works for us, be a little more introspective about who we are and what we want and what our goals are, our social aspirations are, and just find a plan that works for us.
So I've also been, as I've started creating content around personal finance, I feel like a lot of people ask me, okay, what is the formula? How do I do it? And I was thinking about dieting or I was thinking about how this relates to dieting. Like people love the 10,000 steps a day. For whatever reason, that was so formulaic that it really resonated and stuck with a bunch of people. And people can remember that 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah.
Dave Ramsey's Save $1,000. People remember that because that's formulaic. It applies across the board, according to him. And people resonate with that again. So do you think, while I agree that personal finance is personal, I feel like some people are just looking for a formula. What is the closest thing to a formula you could give them?
That's a great question because I don't know the answer off the top of my head. If the formula was like, if you wanted to break it down in like the simplest terms of like live below your means, save the difference, invest in for the long term and like be diversified, like it's probably something, I would say it's something really broad and non-specific like that. I think once people get into a formula of like save X%, then it's really different. Like, do you make $10,000 a year? Do you make $10 million a year? That's a big difference. One of my qualms, if you're watching like CNBC to invest, and you'll see the guy on CNBC who's like, you should sell Apple stock. And I want to be like, who are you talking to? Are you talking to the 19-year-old day trader? Are you talking to the widow living on a fixed income? Because the advice is going to be completely different there. So it's like, yeah, if there was a formula of like live below your means, save for the long term, but that's so dry and non-specific. But I honestly think in my view, that's as close to a formula as you can get. You just mentioned 10,000 steps. Okay, great. Save $1,000 from Dave Ramsey. Like, yeah, wonderful. But there's still going to be so many people who listen to that and might say, I can't save $1,000 or $1,000. I make $250,000 a year. That's not, so like, there's still a large number of people who are going to listen to that and say, that doesn't apply to me specifically. And I think it's almost like diet too, where are there principles of diet like eat your vegetables, yes, but there's also going to be people who are like, I'm gluten intolerant, so this doesn't work for me, and that doesn't, there's going to be so many differences within the group.
Yeah.
And I think especially for financial content, when by definition you hope that so many different people are going to be watching this, all different ages, different income groups. The more specific it gets, the more dangerous the more dangerous it gets. And I think that's what's so dangerous about something like CNBC, where they're giving universal advice to a wide audience.
No, that totally makes sense. What about, so I know while I agree that maybe there's no specific formula, do you think that there are principles that apply across the board? I know in your book, one of the things you talk about is this principle of greed and wanting things quicker, wanting your money to double quicker and not having that patience and the long-term vision for your money. Is that something that you think applies to everyone?
I think it's true that in most endeavors in life, there's a pretty quick payoff. So like if you go to the gym, you'll be sore tomorrow. Like there's an indication that something's working. If you're on like a new diet, you might feel different that day, the next day. It's a pretty quick thing. And so people take those payoff time periods, and when they apply it to investing, if they're new to investing, they might think, oh, I'm going to invest $1,000 and I'm going to check back next Wednesday and see how it's done. And then, or maybe I'll check back, 2 weeks from now and see what's done. 6 months feels like a long time. Because if you were going to the gym for 6 months and you saw no progress, you're doing something wrong here. But in investing, like we know, it's not intuitive for people, but this is an endeavor where you might lose money over a 10-year period. And that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Investing is a very, very long endeavor. I think the closest example is like planting an oak tree. Like if you planted a seed in your backyard and checked it next Wednesday and you're like, oh, it doesn't work, it's a scam. You're like, no, it takes a long time. And the results are going to be magnificent, but it's going to take 50 years. And I think investing is really close to that. And it throws a lot of people off. By far the biggest problem for new investors is not understanding how much time is needed to put the odds of success in your favor. And it's not a month, it's not a year, it's something closer to 5 or 10 years before you're like, okay, if you've given it that much time, you should start to see most likely whether you're doing it right or wrong. But even in that scenario, even in 10 years, even if you're doing it right, it's not without precedent at all that maybe you've done fairly poorly. If the economy is doing really poorly, if there's a financial crisis, if there's a pandemic, whatever it might be. So that's what it's really a lifelong endeavor, and that's what screws people up if they're not familiar with that time frame.